John Betjeman had the right idea. He said, "What would you be, you wide East Anglian skies, without church towers to recognise you by?" The Norfolk skyline is punctuated by over 500 church towers, and it's unusual to stand anywhere in the county without at least one being visible on the horizon. Yet the form which Norfolk towers take varies considerably, and I'd like to use this opportunity to introduce you to a wide variety of structures the county has to offer. This view of the city of Norwich shows you 3 medieval towers and gives me an opportunity to remind you that towers were built for a variety of reasons. Sometimes, as here, they drew you to the building. Others were purely to house bells or just to demonstrate wealth. None in Norfolk was built as a defensive structure. In the 10th century, St Dunstan recommended that each church should have a bell, but many of these were hung from trees or porches, and church towers came later. It was assumed till relatively recently that Norfolk's 124 round towers were all of Saxon date, but now we realise that only a handful of that early, including this one at West Lexham. It's lime-washed, as the exterior of all early rubble-constructed buildings were. They were built round as a local fashion which extended to neighbouring counties in the south and east of England. There was no structural reason for building them circular. Few of them demonstrate datable Saxon evidence, although this one at Howe has a circular window, which we know was a form popular before the Norman conquest. It was constructed by building a wicker basket into the rubble wall and removing it when the mortar was set. There are a dozen or so examples of this type of window in the county. We also used to think that round towers were built because we lacked good quality building stone, making it difficult to create a corner. However, here at West Dereham near Swaffham, the round tower, which is one of the largest ever built, is constructed of local Carr stone, where it would have been easy to use the squared blocks to create 4 corners. So we can see that this was a fashion rather than a necessity. Fashions by their very nature come in and out, and many churches which originally had a circular tower replaced them when they were deemed old-fashioned, and a good example of this can be seen at Denton, where they literally squared a round tower off, and in this view you can see part of the circular structure surviving on the east face of the tower. Another common alteration which may be found is the addition of a top story to an existing round tower, usually in octagonal form, to take bells. This happened in the late 14th and 15th centuries, when we started to have more than one bell in each tower, the added height making it easier to ring bells that were now mounted on wheels. By the Norman period, the Romanesque designs which they favoured did not lend themselves to circular towers, so the majority of Norman towers are square, and this is one of the most dramatic in the county at South Lopham. It takes the form of a central tower built between nave and chancel, but without having transepts. The Normans disliked large areas of blank wall, and as you can see, the middle stages of this tower are broken up with blank arcading, and, like all rubble constructions, these surfaces would have been covered by limewash. A church on such a grand scale was out of the reach of most parishes, and this must be the result of major financial input by someone who could draw masons away from working on Norwich Cathedral in the early 12th century. When you're building a tower, it's important that you know what you're doing, and many towers have collapsed over the centuries, especially in exposed locations. This is the church at Haysborough, which would have acted as a beacon for mariners. Below the bell opening you can see a square hole, and this is a relatively common feature in the county, and we refer to them as sound holes, although their real purpose was for ventilation. Sometimes they can be very attractive, as this example at West Lynn on the banks of the River Great Ouse shows. Because sound holes are made of imported limestone, they were an added bonus, only installed as funds allowed. Actually, any church tower was expensive, meaning that only a handful were constructed by a single benefactor. It became common to find towers built as a joint effort between various donors, and the best example of this can be found at North Lopham. Here, set into the south face of the tower, are inscriptions recording the names and initials of donors. Here's an inscription asking for the prayers for the soul of John Cayley, who left money to the building of the tower, whilst above are the initials of other benefactors as the tower gradually rose in height. At West Tofts in the Breckland region of Norfolk, the donors were given their full names in a frieze which runs along the plinth at the base of the tower, and here we see the name of Robert Rolfe. Because of the lack of good quality building stone in the county, stone spires are rare, but here's an exception at Snettisham, which Sir Nicholas Pevsner described as the most exciting 14th century church in the county. Spires on a more manageable scale are often built of timber, like this one at Ersham, with a shingled wooden spire. There's an oddity I'd like to show you at the Church of Terrington St John, where the tower was added to an existing nave, and at the join a small structure was built on the roof to house the priest. And in fact, Norfolk churches continually surprise, because I'd like to finish with the remarkable church at Borough St Peter, where a medieval tower was left unfinished at the Reformation and was later used in the 18th century as the base for an extraordinary tower built of brick by the Boycott family, who incidentally give us the phrase, to boycott. It's quite extraordinary and unlike any other. In our travels around Norfolk churches, I think we should pay more attention to church towers, their periods of architecture, their details, because they're just one part of the jigsaw that helps us learn so much about the history of these buildings, our predecessors, and the way in which they viewed their parish church.